Right. You're being recorded, folks. So mind your language, etc., etc. Remember, I'm going to see all this tomorrow. So I wish it was a joke. Right. So first of all, a happy new year to you all. It's 2022, which is amazing when you think of it. 2022. Wow. Anyway, so in celebration, we're going to talk about freedom. And last month we had the whole session on freedom, and so many people contacted me and they said we want more, we want more freedom. So so I decided, okay, we're going to do freedom, and we're going to link it to things that need to be linked. So and I decided on 3 F words: fate, freedom, and facts. And what I felt when I was thinking about it was that those 3 are the basis, I feel, how we think of what and how we are, because without them, our existence doesn't seem to make sense to us. Anyway, the 3 in the title, fate, freedom, and facts, are intimately connected. I could have included faith, but you would have thought I was going to talk about religion, etc., which I generally don't. But we have faith in fate, and we have faith in freedom, and faith in facts. Okay, if we think about our being, our existence, I would think that it's based upon the notion, the fact that we are autonomous and free to do what we want in a general sense. And which reminds me, I need to stop and do what I usually do in the beginning. For those who haven't been here before, I talk for as short a time as I can possibly do, and it could be very, very long, but I'm holding myself back. Those 3 words, you could have hours discussing. In fact, you could have a whole university session on those 3, because there's a lot to say. So I'm going to touch on a few points, and I will talk for a little bit, and then I'll open it up. And what I basically do is I throw bombs. Now you can catch them. They possibly might explode, and it's my way of asking questions. I think that asking questions is much more important than giving answers. Giving the right questions gets you to think about different answers. In any case, I think that we think that we're free in a general sense, even though we know that we actually aren't really free. But we feel that we can do what we want. Funnily enough, I think that as we get older, we begin to realize how not free we are. But by the way, each of the sentiments in the title are untestable, and so perhaps not valid. You can't test any of those 3, okay? If there's fate, then there's no freedom, since fate can be seen as such only afterwards. You don't know about fate till afterwards, right? So it's deterministic. In that case, neither freedom nor fate is a fact. But if determinism is a fact, then freedom and fate are facts. You see the problem here. They're either facts or they're not facts, or they're both. So that's a little bomb to think about. And by the way, if you feel it might be good to write some of these down, there's a lot of stuff coming your way. You can ask about any of them, but there's a lot. Okay. Fate, somebody mentioned free will. Fate leaves no room for free will. Okay. Fate could be summed up as it is what it is. And those who were with me a year ago know that we spent 2 or 2.5 hours talking about it is what it is. So that is, and in there we never mentioned fate, as far as I remember. So it is what it is, which is fate, or rather, it is what it was, right? Because it's the past, or it was what it had been. Okay. So on the other hand, where you are, which is fate, can fool you to think that you had free will to get here, i.e. to choose your fate. So those who believe in fate are, as far as they're concerned, in a win-win situation. But since fate is the only road that was taken, there is no road not taken. That poem, The Road Not Taken, is strange. There cannot be a road not taken. You've only taken the road where you are, not a road where you are not. But we'll go into that a little bit later. Okay, for those who like the poem, sorry about that. So the dirtiest four-letter word that I can think of is fact, and it also starts with an F, but not the F you're thinking of. I think fact is a much dirtier word. It is the notion that will run through the entire topic tonight. And those who've been with me for a while know that for me, fact is a red flag. Okay, we had more than one session on fact, and people scream and yell about fact. Everybody has facts, all right? But okay. Now there's this thing that I see on Twitter and on various, when there are arguments about anything, is somebody says everyone's entitled to their opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. All right, now that sounds great, and it's wonderful in a cocktail party. It's one of these things that mean absolutely nothing, because does it mean? But what does entitled mean anyway? When you say people are entitled to something, in what way are people entitled to anything? Well, there are people coming in. Okay, so what does it mean? Does it mean you're free to have your own opinion, or is everyone free to have their own opinion? And if they are, what if it clashes with your opinion? For example, smoking in public places. So what is the connection between opinion and freedom to act on your opinion? All right, I don't know who is entitled to have an opinion that somebody else doesn't have. All right, so if I act upon my opinion because I know the facts, am I not entitled to my own facts? Really? Why am I not entitled to my own facts if there are no objective facts? So, but if I am entitled, then will my facts be fated? Okay. So, what does it mean to have a right to something? Do we have a right to happiness, love, work, money, sex, to freedom, to do what we want, to practice my religion? Do we have a right to clean air? Do we have a right to a future? Are any of these rights, take a right from someone else? And it is problematic. So for a minute, let me talk about time, because time is for me a central issue, as you know. Fate is about the past, while freedom is ostensibly about the future. Right? We have a future, we have freedom to do something, i.e. in the future, but our fate is what has brought us here. So fate and freedom cannot coexist, because neither the past nor the future are fact. We have problems here. But why are you here? In order to listen to problems. As I've said, I've never promised you a rose garden, and then you're never going to get one here. So people keep on popping. Oh, people are popping in here like crazy. I'm not starting again. Don't worry. Fate is associated. Can everybody please put on their videos? I insist. Lona, etc. I insist. Do you hear me insisting? It's not working, my insisting. Okay, fate is associated with crossed paths, crossed paths, okay? For New Agers, everything has a reason. And so crossed paths are never coincidences, right? So incredibly anthropocentric, it really is. It's a view of time having a role that serves mankind. Time serves us as individuals, which is very strange. So basically, there is no such thing as good and bad timing for New Agers, right? Since events happen at exactly the time they're supposed to happen. And this is what is commonly known as fate, destiny, kismet, etc. John Lennon summed it up when he said, and I quote, there's nowhere you can be that isn't where you're meant to be. Now that sounds great. It's another cocktail party, nice thing to say, but in actual fact, what is meant to be? What meant to be is hugely problematic. In some way it's spiritual, because meant to be by whom? Who decides that it's meant to be? It basically it is, we are where we are. We're back to that again. But that would mean that time works specifically only for us. Fate then means that whatever happens is predestined to happen. According to this, we don't really make decisions or have a choice, since if we did, there would be more than one possible result. By the way, psychologically, of course, the idea that things happen for no apparent reason is deeply unsettling to many people. Just imagine things happen for no reason. We like to have reasons why things happen. Imagine that we are wandering around, things happen. But this is some of the problems. So where does free will fit into the equation? The notion that there's no such thing as a coincidence, which means things are meant to be, does not surely square with New Age credo that we create our own reality and destiny. How, in other words, do destiny and free will live together? These are contradictions, and they're considered legitimate in Buddhism and New Age, following on the Tao notion that if you understand, it means you don't understand. And Joseph Campbell's, if the path before you is clear, you're probably on someone else's. I'm not a big fan of these expressions. I think, but I shouldn't really say it, because there might be some who love this sort of stuff. But for me, it's a sort of, I don't know, it's a play with words. They sound wonderful, but if you think about them, I'm not quite sure what they actually mean. But the main objection to the inevitability of crossing paths, i.e. fate, is that it can never be proven to be incorrect. Never. It's always correct. You're always where you are. It's no big deal. Since we always look at it in hindsight, we can never. It'll always be right. And there's something wrong with that. Even spectacular misses, such as Decca Records' rejection of the Beatles, for example. Was it 1962? Yeah. They said something like, "We don't like their sound, and guitar music is on the way out." Now that was a cross path, which absolute rubbish, because the cross path was a ridiculous path. But anyway, being here now, we are where we are supposedly meant to be, is a safe place, right? It's very nice. We're here because we're meant to be, etc., etc. It is held onto as a haven and as a situation that, when found, gives comfort and peace of mind. paradoxically, by the way, as we have seen, being where we are supposedly meant to be, seem to result in a total lack of control of our lives. And we don't want that. But there is an incredible contradiction to all of this. We're meant to be, we've got no control, and yet we have free will. There's a great mess here. All right. So that is sort of an interesting way of looking at the mess that a lot of people believe in. If fate is true, and everyone's fate is true, right? If all fate is true, then no fate is true. You can't have it both ways, right? Or, and here comes the punch. It shows that there is no one truth and no facts. Oh. So there are two sorts of fates that I have noticed. There's what I call the soft fate, which is and the hard fate, which is determinism. So the soft version is whatever happened had to happen, and that whatever will happen will have to happen. The hard version is much more selfish. It adds a sort of mystical or religious element of fulfilling one's destiny. Everything happens for a reason outside of us, but for me, for each of us. Destiny smiles on us, bringing us forward. And a very good example, by the way, was W.H. Bush, who was saved from being beheaded and eaten by the Japanese in the Second World War, who said that he was saved because he had a mission to fulfill. And if I can quote him on that, he said, "Why had I been spared, and what did God have in store for me? In my own view, there's got to be some kind of destiny, and I was being spared for something on earth." Well, there you have it. That's W.H. Bush. But we all feel that we're special, all of us. It's personal fate and faith, which is a complete lack of freedom, especially if God is involved. I mean, W.H. Bush had no other way to go than where he went, but he was special, as we all are. So but believing in fate, as I mentioned, is a win-win situation. The way that fate always works is that that which has happened was bound to happen. With hindsight being 2020, whatever occurs will always have been fate, whichever way it turns out. So the future and fate are imprisoned in the same box. They can be seen to happen only in retrospect. The underlying conviction is that the universe has a goal, and the ultimate goal of progress is perfection. This was taken on board by Darwin, by the way, who saw it as the goal of his theory of evolution. Now, that aspect of evolution has been buried, and by later people who rejected his religious connotation. So the emphasis is natural in the ability of organisms to best surviving in their environment. But he thought that perfection, that evolution leads to perfection, and of course, perfection is maybe for another talk. Now, for the historians here, I've got to mention history. When historian Yuval Harari tells us that when we study history, we do so to understand that our present situation is neither natural nor inevitable, and that we consequently have many more possibilities before us than we imagine. But he is subscribing to retroactive free will. How? From a position after the events have happened. Could our location in time not be natural or inevitable? it's gone. We can't take a lesson from that because there are no open things that we can go to. What he's showing in history has passed, is finished. That there can surely not be anything more natural than where we are. So the line between fate and free will can indeed be fuzzy. My question is all history in fact fate? There's a question for historians to think about. Again, there is no road not taken, right? And an opposite thought is is fate, or is history, is fate inevitable? So do we see an inevitable path in current events, a sort of Hegel dialectics? Look, for example, at the moment, there's a big thing going on, at least in the States, and that other people notice that do current events portray the possibility of a civil war in the United States? There's a book that's just come out by Barbara Walter called How Civil Wars Start. It is very, very interesting. But we have to ask, does history lay out predictions helped along by social media, where the internet has revealed just how fragile a government by the people, for the people can be? And we are in that state now where I don't want to say there's a possibility, but some of the things look so dangerous that things that we cannot imagine might happen. But this is, we can't predict. But well, I can ask, is there such a thing? And as I'm talking about that, I obviously have to link to quantum mechanics. I mean, obviously, you can see that coming, right? So particles aren't anywhere until we measure for them, right? So my question, so before then, they exist in inverted commas within a range of possibilities. So my crazy question is, does a particle have freedom to be anywhere? Is its freedom curtailed by our finding it? At that point, has its freedom stopped? Because we've got it, we've pinned it down. So when a particle is located, would we then say that it was fated to be there? Now those are philosophical questions about quantum mechanics. It's ridiculous to say anything like that, but we have to. We have to, if we think about it, that things are only possible and exist when we find them. The question, of course, did they exist before we found them? Okay, so what I need to ask is, can we point to something that cannot be pointed to or at, let's say? And is there an inner voice? People talk about the inner voice, all right? Where does it come from? And how does it give us freedom to hear or to not hear it? Another question of mine is, I'll be finishing in a second, are we free to not think? To not think? Are we free to do that? Think about it. Try not to think now. You all failed. No, that there isn't any freedom even in what we think. I have to tell you this, a personal thing. I was listening to a non-edited podcast interview with David Foster Wallace. He's an author, very, very nice, very personal. And this was in 2003. It was very, very long. It was unedited, and I was very impressed by him. I stopped, I did something else. I came back another day, but in the meantime, I looked him up. I Googled him to find out what it's all about. I found out that he died, right? And when I carried on listening to that, I listened to it and saw him in a complete different way. I saw a bloke who was speaking, who had consequently died, and everything he said, I saw in a different perspective. I had no freedom to do what I was doing, but I was amazed how I watched it differently. And there's something else that I mentioned once to you, that when you look at a photo, say, of a group of people that you knew, and that one or whatever had died since then, you can never look at that photo objectively. You will always look at that one person and know that person died. If you see a couple at their wedding, everybody's very, very happy, but you know that X number of years later they got divorced, etc., and it was bad, etc. When you look at that picture, you will not see a young smiling couple. You will see it in the perspective of what happened in the future. You're looking back, sort of into the future. Somebody else seeing that couple won't see it the way you do. They'll just see a nice couple. Last month, I mentioned that we are free to sleep in the street, just as a homeless person is. So we are all also free to jump off a cliff, but we don't generally jump off cliffs. We are free to do it. Are we as free in the same way as a homeless person? We could also sleep in the street, right? But by the way, I knew somebody who, when he went to a hotel and there was a balcony, he put furniture in front of the balcony to stop him from jumping off. And that is, I find that, I've always found that amazing. And now, where's Terry? Terry, good. As you know, Terry, I always mention AI in your honor, because you always have something good to say. I'm going to finish off with this because AI is always interesting, always interesting. So I must ask, if we teach a robot to think for itself, will it be free to do so? That is a question. You don't need to answer that, Terry. No, wait. I know you want to. Now, here I'm asking whether freedom is a uniquely human attribute. Is it? Does it apply to robots? Does it apply to animals? And is thinking about freedom itself a human way of thinking? Would a robot think about freedom? Obviously not, but I don't know. I used to think, by the way, that that humans teach robots how to be like us. And after reading a lot about it and speaking quite a bit to Terry as well, but I discovered that actually we are learning more from AI what it means to be human. So, for example, Terry once told us how incredibly complex standing up and sitting down is for humans. Now, to get a robot to do that is incredibly difficult. The number of muscles and the nerves and all the things that we do just from sitting down to standing up. So we have to do that. Now, the work done on automatic cars like Tesla, automatic driving, shows what needs to be learnt about humans. Now, we want to be free to remember as much as possible. But the human brain, by the way, tries to forget as much as possible because it can't possibly cope with everything that happens and remembers all of it. All right. So we have to forget stuff in order to remember the small things that are important for us. All right. And we can't remember everything. It is impossible. Our brains would explode. So robots need to know what to forget. There's stuff pouring in. There's stuff that they have to not take notice of, but they have to remember, and I say remember in inverted commas, what is relevant. So, for example, our eyes don't see in 3D, but our brains make us believe that we are seeing in 3D. Our brains paint in things that we don't actually see. We have blind spots, and then the brain paints it in, and we see things. Now, a robot has to do that. So in order to create efficient robots, like, for example, the Tesla automatic drive, they have to be more efficient than humans. They need to react faster than humans. They need to be able to anticipate what might happen. For example, if a child is standing on the side of the road, that child might go over. Now, a robot has to think in the way that a human does. And just because a child is standing there doesn't mean that he will run across, but he could. Now, a robot has to actually know that. We have to teach him that, which is absolutely, amazing. This is not prediction, but possibilities, that they are human possible actions. Now, there's one thing that's amazing that we notice with tiny kids, that if something disappears, if something goes behind a wall, for a child, that's gone. And when it appears again, oh, they enjoy, they can do this for hours. They got new things appearing. Now, when we see let's talk about robots. If a robot sees somebody in the street who goes behind a sign, behind a lamppost, for a robot, it has to know that is still there. That is amazing. Now, we do that. We know that person has not disappeared. We know there's somebody behind there, and he can go out. Now, you've got to teach a robot to do that. That is absolutely amazing. Which brings me to Hume, of course, about the fact that when we look at something, and we look away and look at something again, we know it's the same thing, which actually it isn't, but we assume it's the same thing. All these things have to be taught to robots, and they have to have the freedom to be able to do that. So robots don't know about fate, right? If they believed in fate, they wouldn't function in a way that we want them to. And at that point, I will stop. I just mentioned a few small things, and those of you who want to talk, leap at me or whatever, the floor is yours. And wait a minute, I've got some people who I can't see. Who did I see here? Why all these people not? Why LB? Why can't I see you? Why can't I see? Fika, hello. How are you? Good to see you. There's
Thank
S.
you. Hello, good to see you too.
There's Arvind. You've got to get out of you've got to get behind your post. You have to. I absolutely insist. Please. Nobody takes a blind bit of notice of me. Isn't it terrible? Listen, I'm in charge here. Get out. Come out. Somebody's Arvind. Can you please come out? S. Can I please see you? Olga, I know you're here. Billy, I haven't seen you at all. And LB, you must come out, or I'm going to get rid of you. I'm serious. This is not good. I need to see. You don't have to talk. You just got to be there. Just be in existence. Okay. So I think that I've got Terry and then James. Okay. Terry, go for it.
I will point out James was first by a long margin, so it's up to you on whether you want me to talk first.
You're not very clear.
James was wanting to talk quite a bit longer than before I posted.
Okay, sorry, didn't see that. All right, then you give way. We're so polite here; it's amazing. We must be We must be the politest meetup group in the whole world. Okay, in that case, you stand back. James, go. I'm sorry, I didn't notice. James.
Thank you, Terry and Ron. I want to congratulate you on casting such a wide net today.
And, people will have so many things to talk about and so many interest in what you've said, so much interest in what you've said. I'll try to go quickly and so that you don't cut me off too soon.
Never.
Thank you so much. We're talking, you talked about facticity, and facts, even having doubt or skepticism about facts. And then, and obviously, you like being skeptical because then you talked about doubt of facts and having limits on what can be remembered, and what can be remembered and what can't, that there's this continuous process of forgetting. There might be other reasons for forgetting than just simply having too many facts in your memory. You might have other processes of forgetting that are much more active than simply the age of memories or the things. We have these minds that evolution created that are incredibly large, that have incredible capacity for remembering the things that happened in our long lives, and to store the various aggregates of knowledge that we accumulate through studying and our action in the world. What you were talking about, a lot of what you were talking about, Ron, brings me to temporality and being, the relationship that we have with temporality. We have a past, we have a future, and there's a rapture. There's a rapture in the middle called the present. And a lot of people don't even think about the rapture that occurs, when we pass from our having been, from our facts, over to our potential, the potentiality of being that Heidegger talks about, that we all have, that creates our future. The future being very different from our having been, because our having been, we have our thrownness, our memories of everything that went wrong, everything that was joyful, everything that that we've already known, everything that we've already learned, and which for some people constitutes the reality, but it's not reality at all. It's simply, what we already have been. But then we have a potential. We have a potential for being as we pass through the rapture we call the present. And that potentiality is, in a lot of ways, it's not the same because it's unknown. We don't know all the details of that. And that kind of gives the lie to fatalism. You talked about fatalism, John Lennon, and so forth, the idea that, what will be is always what was supposed to be, that kind of idea. So if fatalism is true, then there is no potential. There is no actual passing through the gate to the future and becoming becoming an intentional, meaningful medium through which the future is created. So fatalism seems like a kind of like it's a reaction to this idea of destiny, that or it is similar to this idea of destiny, that we're just going to end up somewhere, and it doesn't even matter what we think or what we do or what our intention was, because facts are what the facts are, and there isn't any temporality. There's no moving through the gate of the present. So don't even care about anything. Just study quantum mechanics, and you'll be okay. Terry, dying to hear from you.
What? 1 second. I can't. I want to not say something, but I can't not say anything, because you mentioned time, and anybody who read my book Time to Tell will know that I disagree with you so vehemently about the present, and so I will in 2 minutes or less say my theory of time. There is no present. There is no present. The present is gone instantly into the past. The only thing we've got is the past. It's the only thing we know, and we don't know that because the only part of the past that we know is our memory, and the past is memory, and the future does not exist. But because we never get to it, we only have potential. And why do we not get to it? Because it's based on the past that we don't touch anymore. But that I've said my bit. And if you want, we can do a whole thing on time, which I would love to do. We did it once ages ago, but I just wanted to mention I couldn't resist it, James. I couldn't let you go through and tell us how important the present is when I don't think there is any. So I hope that's all right with you.
We need those book sales.
we-
You know, I'm with you.
We can
The future, by the way, those book sales for the future, in the future, those are really important. Thank you, Ron.
I agree with you. I agree with you. We'll battle this out another time. Okay, thank you very much. Terry.
One thing I wanted to comment on that where I was tempted where you're talking about is you mentioned the idea of can we program robot free choice, some kind of goal or direction. I don't remember quite how you phrased it. Maybe you want to how was you said it?
You're very unclear today, Terry. It's coming in and out. Yeah, that's better.
Well, I'm not. Can you hear me now?
It's better. Yes.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, I'm gonna try a little switch here. I've got speakers on, and they may be interfering with the microphone.
Yeah.
The question is, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yep. But only when you talk.
There does seem to be a correlation. But you mentioned one thing about robots, about trying to create a robot that would have a free will or an ability to do that. There is flatly no way to do it. Robots, more so than humans, they do what we tell them to do. And everything that deviates from that is an illusion or an approximation or an extremely elaborate magician's trick to try to make it look like. And that's not just a small field. That's a major field of AI. Is how do we make a deterministic machine seem more like a human? And it is not easy. It is not easy at all. Things that humans do, the whole concept of intuition, the whole concept of insight, creativity, we stink at that. We throw out randomness and describe that as being somehow creativity, but that's a really cheap definition of creativity. In fact, it's not a definition of it at all. Nonsense. True randomness is not creative; it's destructive. Thermodynamic temperature is an example of true randomness, and you don't create something with a hot flame; you burn it to pieces. So we don't understand that navigation part, what's going on with machinery. Your other comment you said about AI, what you forget is unbelievably important for AI, because even with all the mass machinery, trying to focus on what's important is really one of the trickiest things. And it took, oh gosh, about 3 decades before the AI research started to focus on focusing. And focusing has to do with this whole thing of what does it mean to determine a path, to choose a path, because there's always an infinite number of choices that you have. And trying to select that particular choice is really tricky. So right now we mostly just imitate what humans do on trying to select a particular path. So interesting, tricky business. And as you said, try to program computers to act like people tells you a lot about how much we don't know about how human brains work. And very quickly about how some of the fundamental concepts of how the universe works, because humans work in time, humans work in concept, humans work in object. Try to define time without a human brain. If you really are precise about it, you can't, because you have to have something to measure it. You have this whole definition. What is the past? What are the same issues you were talking about? Those don't become abstract. Those become things you actually have to put into a program to say, what do I mean by the past? What do I mean by the present? What do I mean by the future? And none of that is easy. None of that is easy. So it makes for a peculiar set of circumstances that you have to navigate. But I'm always fascinated by how difficult it is to do free will on a computer. that is just, they just, almost by the definition of how computers work, that it doesn't go there. Maybe in some of the quantum computing stuff, if they have any idea what they're really doing on that. I'm increasingly convinced some of that is just spurious. It's gone on for 2 decades saying this will all work great, and it never does. I'll say, well, it's noise. We got to get rid of the noise. So I don't think we know yet, even with things like quantum computing, what we even mean by creativity. Now, flip side to that, deterministic universe. I am philosophically or emotionally or whatever disinclined to think that the Encyclopedia Britannica that I have sitting down in my living room, I still have a paper copy, was predetermined by everything, and there was no other possibility in the universe except for that encyclopedia sitting down there in my living room. So the whole complexity of that entire encyclopedia just had to be. When I can think of, with the tiniest changes, where a gazillion other possibilities could have been, exploring your different universes. So I don't know.
There's a problem there because
determinism. Yes, I'm sorry, Ron.
No, sorry. Because the fact is that the books are sitting there. There's no other way. There's no other way. They couldn't have been anywhere else. That's the road not taken. There was causality, and you can go back and you can see exactly why they're there in your living room. But to say that they could be somewhere else is fallacious. That they can't be anywhere else. They're there. Now, before that, you can say, well, we could have them anywhere. But in fact, as soon as you say they're there, that's where they are. It's pointless saying they could have been. It's the road not taken. There is no road not taken. The road that's taken was the road taken. As crazy as that sounds.
Although I would point out that the focus on in that case was more simply the complexity, the information complexity of the encyclopedia, as opposed to its location, is a marvelous thing. But I agree completely with the point. It is what it is.
Yes.
But then you get this whole thing about this little nasty concept of the future. Do you have an ability to navigate so that you could create a different encyclopedia in the future, whatever you want to call the future to be? And it gets kind of interesting. By the way, Ron, I didn't realize your position on facts was a little stronger than I thought.
Oh, it's much stronger than even that you'd think.
So your position is that facts are the foundation of philosophy, right?
No.
Oh,
we have to do.
Facts are a bad thing. That's a fact. But you said that.
If you think that Terry is thinking something right now, then you believe in the present. I just wanted to remind you.
No, he's not. No. He's not thinking anything right now. He can't do. By the time it got to us, he's already thought it.
And yes, there's a, and that little. I don't even know if I want to dive down that hole. That gets really interesting to say what does it mean?
We'll have to
see what that means. Even
we'll have to do another session on facts and truth. I can see that gets people really excited. So thank you very much, Terry. I think Richard was next. I think
I had a feeling someone was before me, but I can't remember who.
Maybe it was Michael. Can we have Richard and then Michael? Is that all right with both of you? Michael, is that all right? Michael, can you hear
me? Yeah.
Okay, so Richard and then Michael. Okay.
Okay. Right. I'm not arguing with Terry at all. I agree with what he said, but my view, I am arguing a little bit about your view of robots and AI being consistent. Way back, when I did a little bit of research, AI is so complex that it was split into different parts, and robotics is just one part. I mean, I researched natural language understanding and processing, which is a separate part. Then there was expert systems or knowledge-based systems, which have become a normal part of computing. So all in all, there were 6 parts to it. Now, basically, you could have a robot that had no brain at all, but was controlled by a computer in a different continent or in space or wherever, can control a whole fleet of robots. It really doesn't matter. These are all different problems, but the complexity and trying to simplify something is where I find a flaw in this whole argument. The trouble is everything in the world is so much more complex and there are no simple answers. One of the reasons why we get problems like Trump or Johnson is that they try to persuade the mass of people to believe something is really simple, and they usually look at problems that are incredibly complex. I suspect that going into this whole argument, once again, we are trying to simplify a problem that would take not just one book, but a whole library. I don't know, when you were at Oxford, whether you probably a prominent member of the philosophy club and invited speakers. I remember that I was once asked if I would come and speak there when I was doing postgraduate research, although in fact they decided they didn't want me, so I didn't come, but I was warned that a previous speaker had not got past his introduction because so many people had asked him to explain the terms of reference he was using in his introductory paragraph. I think that is part of the problem. The whole world is an incredibly complex system, and we can't ever really look at it as a whole. We have to take a part and just look at a part that we can look in a granular sense. We have to, in other words, examine the grains of sand rather than the whole beach, because our minds just can't take the beach. And we're really arguing about facts. We're not really looking for facts that are objectively true as if they were religious. We're looking for facts that give us some consistency. In other words, they may not really be facts, but if it gives you a consistent view of the universe, then we can accept them for the time being.
Even if a consistent view is wrong in all ways,
now
it's
that's
consistent.
You put forward your hypothesis, your consistent hypothesis, but you're consistently trying to falsify it as well to see if you can find flaws in that consistent view. I mean, basically, it's Popper's view of science. You only put forward something and it only lasts until someone manages to show that it's wrong. But while you have it, and one last thing about computers and free choice. When I was programming, I was using a language called Prolog, well, a bit of Lisp.
Oh, I love that.
But Prolog, now really with Prolog, you have huge difficulty in putting in free will, obviously. With neural net, I mean, as I haven't really kept up with what's happening, but with neural nets, you produce the possibility of a machine learning something, and that's going towards a view of an intelligent machine. I remember putting forward an argument that machines would only be intelligent when they could deceive people at will. Not that their facts were false. I mean, the facts that we feed them, if you accept those as facts, because they're false anyway, but if the data's wrong, the computer's going to come out erroneously. But what you need is that judgment that's sitting there and saying, shall I put forward an argument that is true? Shall I put forward, it's a bit like playing liar dice. Anyone who lies all the time won't be believed. Anyone who is true all the time will be caught out sometimes. But the person who lies only maybe 5% of the time or 10% of the time is likely to win. I'm afraid I'm showing a misspent youth. Some of you may not even understand the concept of liar dice, but or cheat, the game of cheat on cards. Basically, to get a machine to make a judgment like that, then it goes beyond being programmed. I never got there. You have to understand the human brain. You have to understand freedom, as we're talking about, basically, when I stopped, it was easier to use something. You could use scripts and you could use mathematical modeling to make a machine appear to be intelligent. And that was far faster, even in natural language, than getting a computer to actually come out with natural language, because there is no ghost in that machine. There is no ego, if you like. But you can easily produce a script that will answer to questions as if it were a human being. I mean,
Richard, I'm sure we both know people who do that, who seem to be intelligent but aren't.
Well, I sometimes wonder about myself. I don't know about you, Rob.
I know loads of those.
Brian, can I respond a little bit to Richard before you go on?
I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael, your turn.
Okay, so Ron, I appreciate you made first for your choice of this topic, and you made many excellent points, and I'd like to try to diffuse a few bombs that you threw, and starting with facts, because facts are fundamental building blocks of our knowledge and all our reasoning, right? And I appreciate your notion of hard versus soft idea of concept like fate, for instance, and freedom. So the problem is that we tend to take everything as we are thinking about as a hard version. So we tend to neglect all other limitations and other considerations. And when we take this approach, it becomes really impossible to reconcile all these different concepts like fate and freedom, for instance, because as the hard concepts, they obviously would be mutually exclusive. But probably the world that we have is rather soft. And even when we consider something as definite as facts, it's really a tricky proposition. What is facts and how do we know what we know? And it starts probably from our brain's ability to make this temporal correlations, to relate our experiences obtained at different times. So if we look at something, then we don't look at this, and then we look at this again, and it's still there. So this way we make this inference that it's probably the same thing. Well, sometimes we may be wrong, but most of the time this is the same thing. And then we develop some procedures for measurement and experimentation, and this already requires communication between people and ability to reason about these procedures and to agree on these procedures first, to agree on units of measurement and so on. And only after that we can establish some scientific facts, at least about the physical world. And even this becomes more and more problematic when we are talking about very small systems like we are doing in quantum mechanics, for instance, or when we talk about unique systems like our planet or like the universe. But still, at least there is some approach that leads us to believe in certain facts. But then when we are dealing with more transient phenomena, like with social processes, with each other, with other human beings, with political developments and so on, we just don't have enough information and don't have enough time even to agree on these common procedures and common protocol for establishing these facts. And then these facts, it becomes problematic, it becomes increasingly soft. And although we used to say that you are not entitled to your own facts, but in practice, well, we are entitled to our own facts because we never see the same things as really the same things from the same standpoint and using the same information about them. So we have to communicate more about our observations to agree on facts. It becomes much more difficult to establish them than in the world of physics. And this is something that we have to keep in mind when we argue about facts, especially if these facts are not about physical world, but about social world, for instance. So let me stop here. I'm talking too much, but I also have something to say about fate and freedom, but let me take it.
We'll come back.
Time.
We'll come back to you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Bill, you got your hand up.
Sure. As I listen to this argument and want to move away from the technology question and AI question, in my profession, I'm a lawyer, we're committed to preventing the future from being like the past with rules of criminal and civil liability. And we project into the future all the time in hopes that our rules will inform people on what they shouldn't do, as well as what they should do. And we have a long reach into the future with those rules. And the idea that we apply rules to prevent behavior is a commitment to the future that is the essence of civilization, it seems to me. And I don't think we're seeing that. The future is critical to law enforcement. And it is the issue of our finding a way to do that. And I think if to shift the focus again, isn't the future like the past when it comes to science? Isn't that what science is about? The future will be like the past. Therefore, when we do an experiment today, the same circumstances will produce that result tomorrow. Isn't that the hope that we have? Isn't that scientific knowledge? I throw those questions out only as to get a reaction.
My favorite position. Well, Bill, okay, no, Frank, you're next, but don't you have a little yellow hand like everybody else? I'm not being rude about the color of your hand. No, that's a pink hand. I'll be with you in a second. Bill, I just want to, whenever I say there's no future, people tell me, talk to me about the importance of the future. I agree, the future is essential. My point is that we never actually get to it. That's my only point. When we get what is the future, it was. We never actually reach the future. We want to. We are heading towards it. And I agree, we make rules and laws for the future. But if they're kept, we only know when we get there. And when we get there, it's the past. That's my only point. My only point about time is the future is we never get to it. And it is very important. It's what we all aim for. But we never get to it, never.
Let me say this. The idea of deterrence is a projection about what future consequences are going to happen. Deterrence is a future-focused result that you get from a law. It's a result when you get from terror. It's a result you get from all kinds of questions that project on consequences, and those are future-focused. And that is critical.
I agree, but we only see if it works when it worked or not worked. That's my only point. I'm not arguing with you about the essential part of future. I agree with you. My whole point is a theory of time that we can never get to the future, never, because the future is always ahead of us, always.
I think that logically and categorically that's true, but I'm not.
That's
I
it.
hate to be rude, but so what?
No, it's not. So what if I'm talking about time? I agree with you that the laws are made for the future. I'm with you. I'm only at a mechanical point about time. I cannot say that we'll ever get to the future. I can't do it because I know we never will. We know what we think will happen. We know what we think will happen, but very, very often it doesn't. Very often. So I know, James, you're jumping up and down. I'm going back to you. I know. I'm going to get back to you in a minute. Frank, your turn.
Okay.
I will get back to you, James. I promise you.
Well, when I look at the three issues, the 3 points, fate, freedom, and facts, it seems to me that they're the building blocks for a kind of reality, however you define reality. But the point is, we're human beings. Let's leave the robots alone for the time being, with all due respect. And as human beings, we have to look at it in the historical context. And the historical context says that each generation, each time period, sees these fate, freedom, and facts in a different light, in a different way, a different perception. For example, they created their reality out of it. If I go back to the ancient Greeks, they took fate, this is what we consider as metaphysical, as a very serious, realistic approach. They would go to their Delphi, and on the basis of on hearing what the fate of an outcome of a war would be, they decided whether to go to war or not go to war, or whether there would be victory or whether there would be defeat. They were building their future, their facts, on what we would call today a metaphysical idea, fate. Because the fate they saw would be a projection into the future. It is the final act, the final consequence, which is the future of a linear approach. And we can go further. They saw freedom also differently. Their approach to freedom was that certain people were allowed freedom, certain people weren't allowed freedom. And each territory within the Greek world had a different approach to freedom. And then we can talk about facts. They built their facts up originally from the idea of fate. And their fate was decided because they considered fate as fact. And therefore, I see it in a historical context, possibly because I'm a historian. And we have to relate to it according to the zeitgeist, according to the period of the time. And today we might look at this as we're talking about it today. But what will be in 1,000 years' time? Will we still have the same approach to fate, to freedom, to facts? It will probably be different. That's what I have to say.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting historical point of view. Stephen, sorry I've been waiting a while. And then,
Okay.
and then Katie, okay? Are you okay with that, everybody? Okay. Stephen.
Good evening to you. And this first time I'm talking, and I feel a bit like a gatecrasher because I'm not so experienced in all this philosophical stuff.
No.
I have comments rather than professional opinion. First thing is, I'd like a definition of free will, because when Clive Sinclair was asked when will robots catch up with human beings, he said they won't have to, they'll meet halfway. And that was 50 years ago. And today it's a pretty clever answer, because the human, I've got new knee, new hip, but I could easily have a new nearly everything. And I would still be called Stephen. We're getting to the point where it's very difficult to define what is human and what is a robot, and the difference between the two. Another thing is to define free will. I'm not quite sure. We use the word free will very easily, but how do we define it? It could be just a computerized reaction. The brain is just got billions of cells, but so have computers now, and they're getting very close to each other. I'd like to make another point, is that about facts, they're more personal experiences, based on personal experiences. Try talking to a Jehovah's Witness who doesn't say they believe in what they believe, they know. And they will, and they ask you to sit down for a few hours and read the Bible, and they will prove that they're right. We're getting to the point now where, and if you watch a football match and see the reactions of the two sides on exactly the same event, then interpretation and enthusiasm are going to change the facts quite dramatically. We're getting to the point now where black really can, let's say you can't prove that black is not white anymore. It's becoming, the information that's available is so great that we just haven't got time. Everybody will come up, I heard, they said, she said, I know, and I'll say exactly the opposite, and we're never going to prove the other wrong. That is, and another thing, you mentioned history. I've met a new historian whose job is new history. One is based on new facts as they become available. Another one is based on, of course, the political leader who says, I don't like those facts and I'm going to change them. And within a short time, they become history, they become factual, because we don't have enough information to find out what was the history beforehand. There's so much there, we just accept what is history. So these are a few things I wanted to throw in. I think that is, maybe you should just also mention the Blade Runner going back to the thing that he had sometimes great difficulty knowing who was human and who was a robot. I got
difficulty with that sometimes.
What
so I'm not sure. No, I'm just being facetious.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. All that stuff about facts is very interesting. It's too long. I think we'll have to do another session on facts where people will literally kill me when I tell them what I think about facts. But I've done that before and I've come out alive, only because it's Zoom. Nobody can actually get to me. It's wonderful. I love it. Thank you very much. Okay, Katie, thanks for waiting so long.
Yeah, my thoughts are similar to other people's thoughts, but I'm gonna add my own take on it too. Like, I think I always like to do it's not a counterfactual, I'm not sure what the word would be, like, what if your brain did nothing and you didn't learn from experience? And it was kind of just like, well, every situation is unique and you don't have any filter from the past to come help you with the situation. I think that would be an awful situation. I had to drive into the bike lane 2 weeks ago or something, and the experience from the past of, like, well, maybe he's bored, maybe he's preoccupied, maybe he got in a fight with somebody, and I drove into the bike lane, which was the smart decision, and I avoided an accident. So I think, like, the filter of the past, but I agree that there are, like, limitations to facts, and what we perceive as facts are not as solid as we think we are. But I think also too, with your memory, you go back into your own personal memory and it's just one person's perception of the situation. I think you can also use, like, multiple perspectives coming in to, like, increase the accuracy of the facts. So I think that's also, like, the subjectivity looking into the past, because it's just you.
Katie, when you drove into the bike lane, that was not free will, was it?
I mean, it was my experience driving, my past experience driving my decision. Is that yeah. And I was glad that my automatic reaction was accurate.
But it wasn't free will. In answer to Stephen, to sort of ask what is free will, I mean, to define it is almost impossible, because you can have a will, but if being free is a really biggie, because it can never be free, never. It's cause after cause after cause after cause. And Katie, when you went into that lane, that was not free decision of yours. There was a reason for it.
So in the sense of, like, the reason, well, I made the choice too.
Well, Did you? Was it free?
Well, I had time to think, should I do this? But I agree with you that
Okay, so you decided for some reason that it's better to do that. Okay, that's will, but not free. I have a problem with free will. I mean, I really do, because everything is cause and effect. You can keep on going back and back and back and back. You'll find that it could never have been free, never. And everybody believes in free will, and so do I. I mean, a normal day, you feel like I'm doing things because I want to. But in actual fact, and sorry I used the word fact there. Let me change that. In actual what's it, you're not really free to do anything. All the way back to your parents, etc., etc. There's a reason that you're the way you are. The reason why we come here and other people don't. Right? The reason some people talk and some people don't, and which is fine. I accept all of that. Now I've got LB up, but the reason I haven't asked you, LB, is because I can't see you.
Yeah, I prefer to not be visible because I'm not presentable at the moment.
Ah, I accept that as a reasonable excuse. Okay, fine. Then in that case,
may I speak?
You may speak.
Thank you. I have found a lot of this pretty interesting, and I'm going to try to address a few of them. First of all, the most recent conflict that people have been having, or discussion point, that I find interesting, is the question of the future. And I agree that future is a concept, and you're never in the future because you're always in the, well, if you believe in a present, the present or the past, because time moves too quickly. However, I find it fascinating that people keep talking about the future. And my one example is my mom, who always says to me, "What's the weather for tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, when it's today, you will know what the weather is." And so, people are forecasting futures, but those are forecasts. Those are not actual futures. Same thing with whatever's going on Wall Street. When they call them the futures, they're the plans or the estimates or whatever for the future. They're not the future, because they're estimating something that hasn't happened. And yes, you can do that, and people spend a lot of time doing that because it's important in certain things. Like in the future, are we going to be, the whole question of climate change is a future thing. And that's why a lot of people don't believe it, because they can't imagine the future being the way people are talking about. So this whole future thing goes back to the approximation. And I keep thinking about, you're never in the future in the same way you're never able to get to the the wall if you keep doing half as much and you keep going. You're approaching, but you're never going to get there because it just doesn't work out mathematically. So that's one issue. The other issue I wanted to talk about, and I liked a lot of the comments, are related to fate versus accident versus whatever. So I have a favorite fortune cookie, which I really like. And I've gotten it probably 5 times. And it says, depart, and it's written sort of biblically, depart not from the path that fate hath, H-A-T-H, you assigned. And so my response to this is, how the hell do I know what that path is? How do I know if I'm departing from it? So it also goes along with the, we don't know our fate. If we did, that would be a different thing. So it goes along with a poem written by, I forget how old he was, it's a couple centuries back, Spanish writer who said something like, traveler, there is no path. You make your path as you walk it. It's your steps that are the path and nothing more. So each time you take a step, if you believe in fate, whichever decision you make is the decision that you were supposed to have made if you believe in fate. So, and along with this is, to me, again, I channel lots of different weird things, but one of the reasons I really liked Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being was that he proposed, wouldn't it be nice, same related to this, is like you have two choices or two ideas. It would be really great if you could live two lives and then pick the one you want and claim that as your own, but you can't because you're living at the time you're living. And so this whole concept of how do you choose, how do you know whether you're going the way you're supposed to be going? And I don't think we really do. And then my last, I have two little more comments. One is, you know, there was a comment, I think it was Ron's thing about locating where things are. And so that leads to the question of, are things real or not real, or are people real or not real? Are they only our imagination? And I like that quote, thanks, the Kierkegaard one that just came across. But, you know, I just got interrupted by myself.
Happens all the time.
Oh,
It's okay.
I've always been very into Heisenberg's principle that when you try to identify, at least try to identify where something is, at least if we're talking about subatomic particles, you end up influencing where it is, and it's not really where you think it is based on when you shine the light on it, it moves. So I've always found that interesting. And then the last thing is this whole thing about robots and AI, and and I like the comment about robots leading us to the question of what is human or more human or humane. And I read a lot of fiction, and there's been a number of fiction books lately, including the main one was Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, who creates this character who's an AI, who's the narrator of the book, and leads you, I mean, I've gone to like 3 or 4 book discussions on this book, and leads the question of who is more human or who is more humane, this robot character or people? Humans are not very humane. So I think the question is, yes, it's hard to tell the difference, but the question is, what is a human? And humans are fallible. Humans are selfish. Humans create in their own perspective. And then that goes to the discussion about truth and, you know, what is not subjective in the world. Anyway, so I will stop there. And thank you for letting me speak, even though I'm not manifesting visibly.
Somehow you must be manifested somewhere, so we can imagine it. And I very much like what you said, because goes very, very along the lines that I think. And next time you come, would you manifest yourself as well? I'm not forcing you to, but a manifestation would be.
I will have to commune, and this is a future, so it's a prediction.
Okay. In that case, I leave your future manifestation to you. All right. Is that fair? LB?
Probably.
Okay.
But we'll see when we get to the future.
Okay. Fair enough. And now, thank you very much, LB. Thank you. And now we've got S. Okay. And then we got Debbie. Okay. That's fair.
Hello.
Hi there. S.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Just a brief comment. just on the freedom issue, I tend to take the free will just to be free to, not freedom from, but more metaphysical freedom to, that ability to do otherwise or to think otherwise. I tend to think that, yeah, we do have that, maybe not in the strictest sense of absolute freedom, but I do think of some sort of compatibility with determinism, soft determinism. I don't think fatalism is probably correct. Why? Because I do tend to think that consciousness is probably the source of our freedom. And, just creativity and our role in imagination plays seems to be, because we could think otherwise. I don't necessarily think all things are causal. I think not restrictive causality, although you could still have causality and freedom compatible. It's not necessarily incompatible. But those are some of the areas which I thought were seems to be interesting to me. As far as robots and computers, there's a kind of intuition that some people have that robots probably could kill people, but it's hard to say if robots could murder someone. And I wanted to get back to the issue of law that Mr. Williams had raised. I tend to think that's something about important, that how we build a community based on prevention and how we could do otherwise, or actually, if we think about our history, that aren't we making moral progress? And isn't this something that we consent to, or we can do together? That seems right to me, that we do make moral progress. Like, for example, we're moving away from slavery. We're treating equal rights, homosexual rights, or we're moving away from racism, perhaps. It seems to me that these are conscious efforts that are moving towards the right direction, and our laws can reflect that. So it seems to me that we're not entirely, I don't think, absolutely, even if we were fated, suppose that there's a metaphysical issue of being fated, it's probably best not to take that strongly. Just so, in other words, just live an epistemic life as if we're not strictly fated. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's some very interesting points. I'm sure we'll get back. S, you disappeared when you stopped talking, which is a very interesting metaphysical point here. S, do you still exist when you stop talking? Ah, that's it. That's good.
Oh.
I was going to ask if you still exist when you stop talking, because then we really be at it today.
Well,
Okay.
this meetup is very funny. Zoom is very funny because in real life we don't see ourselves when we talk.
I know. I mentioned that a few months ago. I think it's amazing. Yeah, I'm pleased you brought that up. We do not see ourselves. We only, the Zoom is so different that we actually see ourselves, which is slightly intimidating, I would say.
Yeah,
right?
We hear ourselves.
Yes.
The hearing is important.
Yes, but we don't actually see ourselves. But here we are talking and seeing ourselves and seeing other people reacting to what we see. Not that we know what we look like, because other people see us not the way we see ourselves, but on the other hand, they're reacting to us. But
it'd be strange. It'd be strange. That'd be just like doing this, carrying a mirror, and every time we'd talk, we'd hold a mirror. That seems very odd.
It's a very good idea.
Am I strange in that I don't actually see myself when I talk on Zoom? I tend to look at Ron or the other people, or just...
Very good choice.
Yeah, well, possibly. But I mean, when you're used to looking at an array of students or whatever, you just don't think of trying to look at yourself.
You're right. After a while, you don't look at yourself anymore, but I think you do for a while. I think. I mean, I don't know. I only know what I do. I don't know what you lot are doing. I mean, I can see what you're doing, but I don't know what you think you're doing.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Debbie.
Just to relate to the last point of seeing ourselves when we speak. When I speak now, I'm not looking at myself, but because I'm looking at you and I am not part of the audience. But when I am the audience and part of all the squares, I do find myself looking at myself, and I do see myself as part of the audience. But now I'm actually looking at you, Richard, because you were the last one to speak, and I'm not looking at myself. So the context.
That's my point.
Yeah, and by the way, I read that there's a huge growth in the cosmetics industry, Botox and facial treatments during these 2 years with Zoom. So there is, yeah, really.
I think Ron and I are too old to worry.
I
Yeah,
just wanted
boy,
to say that
watch it.
Some of the filters are
there
not
is
enough.
a button in settings to not have yourself show on your own screen,
Yeah,
so
there
that
are
you
lots
can
of
do the
filters as well.
classroom thing.
And
LB, don't push your luck. Next time you have to manifest yourself. Okay.
I may be able to do that if I remove myself from my own screen, but there is a function that you can do that so that you don't see yourself on your own screen.
Really?
Yes, under other or under more, under meeting settings.
I never go to other. Don't know why. Very, very frightening is other, by the way. You never know what you're going to find out. So sorry, Debbie, you're in the middle. Sorry.
no, it's okay. Yeah, and the other points more relating to, in relation to freedom, I actually wanted to say something in the lines of what S just said concerning the freedom from and freedom to. And it was interesting. I mean, it's been interesting for me to talk, not to talk, but to, not yet till now, but to listen to the issue of freedom. And I kept on thinking about a synonym, but it's not exactly a synonym, of liberty, and which has not been raised here. And I was thinking about the difference that the differentiation, the distinction between the freedom from constraints or barriers that or coercion which enable you to do something. Yeah, it's from, and that is the distinction that Isaiah Berlin made in his famous essay, Two Concepts on Liberty. I think it came out in 1968, trying to answer the question of, and I think, Ron, you also raised it in the beginning, are you free to do something you aren't able to do? In Philosophy for Children, that's what I do. The famous question is, are you free to lick your elbow this side? And do you have freedom to do something you are incapable of doing? And Isaiah Berlin tried to make this distinction between not the freedom from, that you don't have anything stopping you from doing something. I'm free now to do whatever I want to do, or there's nobody stopping here or locking me in my room or at home and stopping me from doing what I want to do, as opposed to freedom to, which is freedom to realize my potential, realize to do what I want to do. So the distinction between being free to do something and actually being capable of, so it's not just that I have the freedom from not doing something, but I can actually, it's not only opportunity that I have, but I actually have the capability, the ability. And if we're talking about in social terms, which is always interesting to me more than metaphysics, is what are the conditions that enable me to pursue my self-realization, self-fulfillment. And I think when, if I get back to the distinction between freedom and liberty, so I think freedom is something that is considered to be more inherent to us as humans. I, as a human, am free. I have it. It's part of being human. It's part of humanity, as opposed to liberty, which is more of a social, political contrast. Is what are the conditions? What are the laws? What allows humans to act in society, in a community? So I think freedom is more individual, and that's where free will comes up. Am I free? Do I have free will to actually decide to sit here and not, or go out, or drink to drink coffee instead of tea, as opposed to, and I can smoke if I want to, it's my home, but do I have the liberty to do that on somebody else in a restaurant, or to smoke on somebody else in society? So I think that's what I wanted to raise, that sort of distinction. And we were talking about the complexity of life, of reality, that Richard, you were talking about, and maybe that's perhaps also can relate to determinism in history. And I think if we try to, okay, we're just in a beginning of a year, and to think how the year can come about, what's going to happen. So I hold a strong belief that we do have agency, that it is not determined. There is some agency, a political agency, as a society, not only as an individual, and we don't know what it will be, not only because, or if perhaps we don't have free will, but that reality is just so complicated. There are just endless possibilities. Whether we're free to take them or not, the possibilities are still there. And I wonder if you agree with that. So we do have the capability to get there. Will we take it? That is another question. And also, if we take it, does that guarantee that the outcome will be the one we aimed for? And we know in history and life and wars, it doesn't happen that way. I mean, if political procedures would be the way we wanted them to be, I think Afghanistan would look different. Wars, the outcome of wars, Iraq. I mean, there's so many examples to see that we think we can control, but we can't. So perhaps it's not that we don't have free will in that. It's just there are so many other factors that are not under our control, as not only as an individual, but as a society, as a community, as a global world. So there's so many things that are not in our control, even when we think that we do have free will. So I don't know if that's a positive way of thinking of things or a negative way, but this is my take on what we've been talking about till now.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you. I'm going to do the following. I've got to get Terry on because he's tapping away here, and I can see it, unfortunately, and it's so interesting. I'm not going to let you get away with it, Terry. You'll have to say what you have to say, and then James, do you still have your hand up from before?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then Michael. So it's Terry, James, Michael. I don't see any of their hands at the moment. Okay. So go for it, Terry.
Can't hear you, Terry.
No, that's what happens when you're tapping away. You tapped your way out of existence. No, hang on, everybody. Don't go away. We've got a
Go to
He's
James.
pointing to something. Terry's pointing to something.
Go to
he's
James.
pointing
or
to
go
me.
to,
okay. Pointing to
Mike.
James.
He
Okay.
said, he's saying that I stopped his audio. Okay, anyway, thank you.
Okay, James.
That's something that probably happened in the future that we don't know. Anyway, I really liked the talk by LB the most. I thought that was great. I have one issue with what she said, which was the not recognizing the future. In other words, her debate with her mom over whether the weather could be predicted, and so prediction is kind of a feature of imagination, and it's true that you can try to want to have no imagination, and that's okay. You could try to will no imagination. You will no prediction. You'll be willing away a kind of like a feature of science. A feature of science is prediction. Not that it's perfect in that respect. And I really liked what was just said about prediction, the idea that we can enter into a war. And because a particular country has such a good reputation for winning wars, why don't we just win another war, for even questionable reasons or motives, why not do that if we're so sure of ourselves? So the idea is like, I don't think everyone thinks they can control everything, but some very naive people think they can control everything. Other very naive people who are manipulative have their human relationships arranged around the fact that they know ways of using discourse to control other people. So I mean, there is a precedent for that for people trying to influence the future through others, and people with a lot of power, like George Bush and that British guy, trying to influence millions and millions of people through political control and their articulation of the motives that they have. So, or that the motives that they're trying to hide. So, what you said, Ron, about the future, I thought was very interesting. The fact that the future, is incapable of influencing the past. It's like, because I think it has to completely to do with your presuppositions about time. And I liked, in this respect, I really like what Debbie said about Isaiah Berlin, because he was a neo-Kantian. And one thing that Kant did is he had an idea about mathematics, was that it's a continuum, it's a line, and it can be represented as a mathematical line, and which represents a form of intuition in which the future and the past and the present all appear, with the present always being a particular point that is emerging at a greater point along that line. And so Kant's idea influences this kind of, it illuminates this idea of Isaiah Berlin, and and also by S, that there's the future involves a kind of like a progression. There's a possibility of progression, even though it's not evident to everyone. There's a possibility of progression, either historically or morally or financially or some nationally, some kind of possibilities of progression can possibly exist. So I think that's a kind of like the root of optimism in a way, which is kind of another kind of opposite of fatalism, the idea that there's not a stuck present, or there's not a stuck, the future doesn't. And I think this idea that, and Ron, I want to take you to task again, because this idea about the future not having an influence on the past is once again trying to create what in your training, you were told to try to create conforming truths. In other words, one truth has to conform with another. So if you believe that the present doesn't exist, obviously there's no divide that the future can cross. And the future is actually, I mean, if you think about it temporally, it's always creating the past. We are all going to die. We're all going to get through this meeting. We're going to get over it. And in the past, there's going to be some version of the future which has passed through a present, which was, you could say it's an instant, or you can say it's many, many, many instants, or you can say that it's a rapture, like I did, like Heidegger does. You know, it's a feature of temporality, which causes a kind of like a knowing cognizance of existence, with that we call consciousness. So the consciousness is not imaginary to us. The consciousness, imagination exists with the consciousness, and it is it enables our projection of the future. And there's a constant movement in temporality, evidenced by the fact that the present is always changing, which you, Ron, take as evidence of the non-existence of the present and the lack of the future creating the past. The future is always there. We sense that it's always there. We always have an imagination which includes it. We always have a destiny which includes it, and the future is always creating the past, because the past continually becomes larger as the result of the future lying ahead of the past and the present. So temporality is real. Denying it doesn't help philosophy, and that's I guess that was my main point. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to pass that, but I won't. Just one point, James. Just one point. You can't say the future is. You can only say the future will be. And I can't talk about the past is either. The past has gone, and the past is a memory. The past is only memory. It's nothing else. When this meeting is over, in 1 week, and I'll ask everybody what happened here, every answer will be different. Everyone. And they will all be correct, whatever you want to say about it. None is correct, and all are correct, and it's all the past. Different pasts, because they're based on what everybody perceived had happened. And a week later, that past will be different again, because the memories would have changed. They would have changed because of memories that are coming in again. And as memories keep on coming in, so the past keeps on changing. The past, in my humble opinion, the past is memory. That is the past. There is nothing else but memory. Like, there can't be, because each one of us is subjective, looking at what happened, what we think happened, and that takes us to the future. And the future has to be based on the past, and that's why we can never get to it. The past is changing all the time, and our future is based on the past that's changing all the time. So I want to say again, I'm not saying the future is not important. The future is essential, except that we never get there. We progress, and when we progress, we look back and say, oh, we have progressed. And the wonderful thing about English has got a present perfect. So when you say it has progressed, a very, very interesting tense, which they don't have in other languages. Very, very, very interesting. But it's always linked. But anyway, sorry, I only wanted to say one tiny thing. We'll battle pistols at dawn, James. We just have to choose which dawn.
That's great. Yeah, because I have more bullets in my chamber.
I'm not sure about that. That's a
you don't like metaphors? What's wrong with you?
Okay, we'll have to decide on the dawn. Terry, have you got your sound back? No. It's coming vaguely through. It's terrible. You've typed some interesting.
Oh, hey, I do not know what's wrong with my microphone. I'm not muted.
That can't happen to a scientist. It only happens to a philosopher. It shouldn't happen to you. You're a scientist. Okay. Sort it out, Terry. Sort it out.
I may leave the meeting and come back.
Okay, whatever it is, sort it out because I want to hear it. Michael, you're waiting, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Michael, please, yes. And then S. Okay, Michael.
Okay. So the longer I am waiting, the more things that I want to say, responding to what other people say. But let me focus on what I can say based on my knowledge of physics. First, Ron, you defined fate as belonging to the past. I see it as the past that continues to the future for some time. Because what we know from our experience is that most systems have inertia. So they have some stability, or at least some stable evolution that continues for some time. And that's why we perceive them as the systems, because they have some stability. Otherwise, we would not see them as something individuated and distinct from environment. But this stability, it's only limited because some systems, actually most systems, they have some so-called bifurcation points. That's the points in the dynamics where the future evolution of the system is not predictable. And I am not only talking about quantum systems with all this quantum indeterminism and uncertainty and so on. Most of classical systems are this way. That's why we can never predict the weather, for instance, and what we perceive as our deterministic world, it's rather a tiny island in the ocean of indeterministic universe. Because most of the world is comprised from not entirely deterministic systems or maybe entirely stochastic systems. And that's what is the modern understanding of the universe is. And this notion of free will, that it's not possible because everything has a cause, it's based on this hard determinism, Laplacian determinism, which was debunked many years ago. And even for classical systems, so our brain, well, maybe our brain is also a quantum system. But consider, for instance, the neural network, artificial neural network. So these systems, they don't have one single cause. Yes, each outcome is predetermined by the causes from the past, but there are multiple causes. And there is this very complex interplay between all these causes that can result in different outcomes depending on the relative weights and the temporal concurrency and so on. And this makes prediction of the future state of the system, even if it could be possible from Laplacian standpoint that if there was a God that would know everything about all particles in the universe. So from this standpoint, it could be possible, but for the system itself and for observers of the system, this prediction is not possible. And of course, you can give the different definitions to free will, but my definition is that your free will is related to decision-making process. And if there are no shortcuts for you to know in advance what your decision will be, then from all practical purposes, and I would argue probably from also theoretical purposes, your decision is free, because you cannot know it until you go through this whole decision-making process, until all your inputs come together and produce the output that you did not know in advance. So in this sense, this is free. There is no way to anticipate it until you actually made your decision. And I also appreciate what Debbie said about that. It's one thing that we can have these free decisions, but it's another thing that we cannot anticipate what is the outcome from our decisions. Because the more people exercise their free will, the less predictable it becomes what comes out of this. And for this reason, I think that it's also important to consider what is rarely discussed, what I would call the collective free will. So we as a community, as a society, we also have some sort of free will, but this depends critically on communication. So in addition to our individual decisions, we have to talk to each other, and especially we have to talk to people who have different views, who have different experiences, and to develop some sort of common understanding of our situation. And this is critically important for stability and for the fate, if you want, of society, and even for freedom of society, because we cannot preserve our freedoms without this communication or without this collective free will. And regarding the past and the future, and James' point about this, there is an interesting theory in quantum mechanics that corroborates this idea, that the past and the future are not independent on each other. So there is this transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics. You can Google for this. And this is the idea, is that the transition from the current state to the future state, it is not determined just by the past. It's determined jointly by the past and the future. So it is a handshake, or transaction, as they call them. And this, I think, is a very interesting idea that may be applicable not only to quantum mechanics, and actually it's borrowed from electrodynamics, it's from solutions of wave equations, but maybe it's even more general than this. But the idea is that the past and the future together determine each other at each point and each time. And this is another way to look at this interaction between freedom and fate. So it's this very complex and interesting interplay between the present, past, and the future that jointly determine, in some sense, also present, past, and the future. So in some sense, the past can be influenced by the future. But the problem is that you never know the future until you're there. And so we always have these limitations to what we can know, what we can do. But still, it does not mean that we don't have at least some degree of freedom, if only we don't take it to absolute. Okay, let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much. S, you got your hand up, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, yeah, but going back with Michael said, I think that's right. Generally, the epistemic issue, we're not Laplacian gods. So to anticipate all possibilities, if even if we're fated, we're still limited in our epistemology. So I think roughly that's correct. But I wanted to, and I think he brought up the issue of community. And to me, when people talk about community, sometimes they talk about ethics. And I think being free seems to be important. Being ethical, because having a free will. Why? Because, well, we tend to praise or blame someone. And this goes back to, I think, what William was saying about our communities and building laws. We tend to praise or blame someone because they could have had a choice to do otherwise. So in that sense, I tend to think when we build our communities, we assume, especially if we're building a democratic community, we assume some aspect of freedom. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a problem with assuming something because it's comfortable to assume it. There's definitely a problem here. We feel things should be, that doesn't mean that they are. And when it comes to ethics and laws and things that we feel it's right that they are, it just doesn't mean that it just doesn't mean anything apart the fact that we're humans and we would like things to be a certain way. But that's as far as it goes. It just might not be. And it's very sad, but it might not be. And I think that we need to face that. I mean, however nice we think things should be, and ethics, etc., but not everybody agrees about ethics. And the fact that we in the West, or we sitting here, do agree about what's good and what's bad, there are just as many people who don't. And the fact that we are right is the same as what the others think about what they think. So to say that there's a clear-cut thing about things that should be, and I agree that should be, but that's it. I mean, I think we need to look past that if we can. And everybody believes they have free will. Everybody does. Until you begin to think about it and think, well, wait a minute, do I really have free will? But then you stop thinking because it's too painful. So somehow we've got to, either we get past it or we keep on saying, well, this is the way it is because it should be. That's highly problematic. I'm not saying that's simple. It's difficult because we all want things to be good and nice, but they often aren't. And that's problematic, and we have to worry about that. And when Michael says there are things like that approximately, that's when I stop and say, yes, everything's approximate, but the approximate doesn't make it actual. It makes it approximate, and it's the approximation that gives us the movement that we can't get away from. There's nothing that's not approximate. We can get very close. We think we're getting close, but when it's approximate, and we haven't got to it. That's why facts cannot exist, because they're approximate. An approximate fact is not a fact. An approximate truth is not the truth. It's approximate. Call it a small t, call it a small f, but it's not it. The it is always approximate, and that's problematic. And we got to get past that, or we have to accept that we accept approximations. That's my little thing. Terry, do you have anything coming out? No.
Can you hear me now?
Vaguely, approximately.
Approximately.
Oh, that's better. Yes, yeah.
I honestly have no idea what's going on with this.
I believe you. I believe you thousands wouldn't. It's okay. That's good.
Can't hear me well at you. Okay.
Yes, yeah, move forward. It's good.
So you can hear me well
yes,
enough.
Yes.
I will put in a point. Michael, I thought you made a very interesting point. I want to point out quickly what are called quantum erasure experiments, which, if you look at the interpretation of Sabine Hossenfelder, had a very good video on that. What happens in the present in those experiments is influenced by what you do potentially quite a bit off in the future. And that's not a hypothetical philosophical point. It's an actual experiment in which what you see now depends on what happens in the future. And it's driving quantum physicists into various forms of insanity, as I think Trevor pointed out, that sometimes your models can make you go a little nuts. But it argues something fascinating, and her points have frustrated me greatly in that, because I always thought, well, yeah, but that's in the undecided quantum past. And she gave a clear explanation of that. We said, oh no, it actually affects its causality. Oops, that's unnerving. But it goes with this idea that in some sense, and this has been part of quantum mechanics for, oh gosh, decades. I mean, Richard Feynman's work, the whole Wheeler-Lagrangian approach is the infinite future and the infinite past both come together and produce now. So I'm inclined towards a more limited subset of that, in which you have like spikes that go into a future that's not fully elaborated, and you have spikes that go into a past that gets blurry, as Ron is saying. But that there's something about this that is that we don't understand it well, but it does involve a more complex view of that. The other comment I was going to make, Ron, is just this whole idea that I very much like your point. You're saying that thinking they're just facts is bogus, because we have incomplete understandings of the past no matter what. We are a subset of the universe. The universe is greater than we are. If you stop and think about it, that automatically means we have to have only a subset, an approximation of anything. And there are times where I would tend to define classical reality, the non-quantum reality we live in, as not much more than a struggle for getting that approximation as exact as we can, so that we can kind of continue to do things, if that makes any sense at all. But the idea that pushing the approximation limit seems to be an inherent part of what classical physics is all about, because it's always approximate. There's never really an exact ball. There's never really an exact moment of inertia. There's never really an exact anything. But we sure like to make you think it is. Computer science, we're the same way. We like to make you think those bits are absolutely certain, and that is totally bogus. Anybody who's designed the electronics of the computer knows very well it's bogus. But we sure like to push it, and we can do a very good job of it. So that, I think there's a fascinating dynamic about, if everything's a little bit indeterminate, even if you are reaching in the past and the future, can you really say that it's all fixed? I don't think so. But it does say that it's a lot more complicated than what we think. So a couple of miscellaneous thoughts, but Michael, I like your points about, and like I say, there's physical evidence as the experimental side that something is really interesting is going on there that we don't quite get.
Thank you very much. I think we just got Richard now with one hand up.
Okay, very quick. I think we're being too absolute about freedom. Can I make a metaphor? I used to keep chickens when I dropped out and moved out into the bush. Now my chickens had a nice run, which they could stay in, but they knew they were enclosed. They were not free. Now, because I believed in free range, I used to open the run and let them out. Then they could disappear into the bush and they could act free. And occasionally one would turn up with a clutch of chicks, but usually they got eaten by foxes if they tried to be free and disappeared. And even when they were free, they could only go a certain distance because they were bound by they couldn't really fly. Chickens aren't very good at flying. They couldn't really travel that far. So they were probably, I owned over a square mile, and they were bound within the limits of the land that I owned. They couldn't, whatever they wanted, become a duck or a goose. They were bound, or a human. So the freedom was illusionary, but at the same time, it was truly there in that they could go out, they could make a nest for themselves, they could get eaten by a fox, they could possibly produce a clutch of chicks. They wouldn't know the difference though. But we are all caged by the way we've been brought up, by our genes, our genetic inheritance, by everything else. But we can break free of this, but we just can't break free of the bounds that we don't know about. Like the chicken.
It's a very, very nice metaphor for I think, our own freedom. And I think that's very nice, that for the chickens. James, you're back for the fight, are you?
Well, I just wanted to summarize. I really respect a lot of the speakers today, and especially Richard, what Richard just said, because it was entirely from personal experience and entirely valuable. To me, it's the idea that the existence of limits does not impose a kind of like a imperfection upon reality. The existence of limits in existence is basically part of reality. It's a built-in feature, and it it's not a statement that freedom does not exist. Freedom is always relative, just as all truth is, and the existence of limits in reality is not a end to freedom. It is simply a condition of possibilities of action. In other words, not being eaten by a fox, not being eaten by the farmer, with all apologies to the farmer. But the idea that we the freedom that we have is absolutely is absolutely phenomenal. It's something that's completely phenomenal, something that we illuminate, and is an availability of reality to us in existence. And it's not the limitations that exist are merely there to be observed and measured, and if possible, even overcome or displaced, or and so forth. Just like the chicken who escapes from the farm but also doesn't get eaten by a fox, God bless her.
James, would you say that limited freedom is freedom?
Absolutely. All freedom is freedom. If I have a wheel and this wheel can spin, half 180 degrees, only 180 degrees, it has a freedom of 180 degrees. That's completely different from freedom of millions and millions of degrees. I admit, like my car can go for millions and millions of degrees, but the limitation of 180 degrees doesn't mean that there isn't freedom, for that wheel to stop somewhere between 67 and 68 degrees without my being even able to predict where it's going to be, because the engineer was pretty much in charge of that, not me.
So every prison cell within there,
Absolutely.
you're free.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The prisoner's free.
Okay, that's okay.
He's just being punished. That doesn't mean he's being. It doesn't mean he's not being punished, but he's being punished, but he's also free in that he has time in the yard. He has meals. He has maybe he has people he can speak to. So there's freedom in confinement, and just because you're being punished, that doesn't mean that you're not free.
It's not a freedom I would vote for.
Could I suggest?
I would vote for it. I would vote for it. I think some prisons do are I don't think they're mandatory, but nevertheless, coercion is something that is a substitute for physical violence, and as long as we have physical violence between humans, we might need coercion, some degree of coercion, in order to limit it. The Pope just spoke. Pope just spoke against violence against women, and I think I was glad to hear that. Even though I'm a former Catholic, I was really glad to hear that somebody with influence was actually speaking up against violence against women.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting. Terry, is your hand up?
Yes.
Thank you very much, James.
I was kind of, as a follow-up on what James just said, and also some earlier comments about law and about the restrictions of law. I think there's actually one of the most fascinating and kind of deep paradoxes of not just human behavior, but the universe itself, is that restricting certain things, but in a global fashion, a universal restriction, simultaneously can act as an enabler for an entire new level of complexity. Now, if I use computer science terminology, I would talk about protocols. You define a protocol, you force everybody to do the same thing. And far from squelching complexity, it does the exact opposite. You get an explosion of synergy, of things interacting, of changes being made. And from that, you get a new chaos, and then new protocols emerge in that. So the universe itself, why do we have only like a dozen or so? I would argue it's even less than that. And the number of fundamental particles is very, very small. The things they can do is very, very limited. And yet you could make a powerful argument that if that was not the case, none of us would be here talking about this. Because the restrictions, the constraints, the fact we don't have an infinite number of particles, an infinite number of this, is what makes our universe go into a mode where new forms of interesting things can happen. And I think this goes all the way into human political behavior, because we talk about conservative versus liberal. We're talking about the same thing. You know, do you follow the rules? Are the rules so good that you never ever want to break out of them? Or do you use the rules to come up with something new and then find out that, oh, you know what, we don't even want to do it that way. So I think there's a fascinating, and I don't know if I've seen that expressed as, some of you might know some philosophers who have addressed that issue in detail. I don't, nothing comes to mind about the conflict, the fundamental conflict between how restrictions, when universal, like language, because it's a restriction. I can go, I can say anything I want to, but so what? It's just chaos. But when I say words like I'm saying now, suddenly the blah, blah, blah means something, and people can build on that. That's a fascinating thing, and it seems to go very deep into the roots. So I don't know if there have been philosophers who have addressed that or not. If anybody has any mention of it, I'd love to hear it.
I think Derrida has spoken about the absolute need to bust through Derrida, the French philosopher.
Oh, okay.
He's written about the requirement for one to burst through the constrictions of language to understand the truth in understanding the truth in reality, the truth in understanding. Language imposes unnecessary restrictions on understanding.
Now, James, what I'm saying is actually, I think, a subtler point, and that's one of the reasons I'm saying I don't think this is well addressed. The breakthrough is important, but to get through the breakthrough, you have to have sufficient communication and diversity for all the opinions to get together to realize, oh, we could do more. And that's the part I don't think, it doesn't feel like it's well addressed, is the incredible power of universal restrictions in some things in terms of enabling communication, enabling exchange of ideas. And language in that sense is an enabler because it allows people to talk. If we each had our own individual language, we'd be very creative in one sense, but we wouldn't be able to talk. And you can have the most beautiful language. Everybody has this fantastic language that they can think all sorts of things, and then they can never carry it to someone else. So that's the aspect of it that I'm curious about. And I realize the other part, the breakthrough, and because at the same time, it's a restriction. It binds you too.
Very much so.
How you see things.
It's going back to approximation, because it doesn't matter how well you frame what you want to say, and whichever rules you put in language, at some point you cannot get close enough to exactness for everybody to understand, because language is approximate. And the more approximate it is, funnily enough, the more we do get along and understand each other. It's when we say, what exactly do you mean? And at that point, you start arguing. Exactly what do you mean? No, that's not right. It's the approximation that keeps us all here together talking about something. And when somebody says, I want to know exactly what you mean, tell me what free will, just explain what is it. As soon as you start with that, you've had it. Then go to a dictionary. Everybody looks up the word, what's consciousness, what's free will, and and it won't work because we all look at it differently. It's all approximation. I don't think we can ever get to what you want to get to, Terry. And a lot of people have looked at it, and nobody's got to it. And
I don't see it as a goal. This is an observation, and this, I know I'm saying something that's not registering well. That to me is all fascinating all by itself. I am speaking in computerish terms because we live in the world of protocol. And in protocols, we know that chaos is not good. Chaos breeds chaos. And yet, at the same time, the whole reason for the protocols is to produce chaos. And there's a paradox there. I mean, you want to be able to create the internet, required protocols, which took decades longer than it should have. But once the protocol is locked in place, whoomp, all of a sudden, everybody could exchange data and the world went crazy. DNA was the earlier example of the same thing. You know, you could have lots of little living things, but until they actually had DNA where they could kind of exchange the information, whoop, nothing really happened. So, and I seriously think, in fact, this is actually kind of confirmed that impression. I don't think this is a really well addressed area on the philosophical side. It doesn't feel like it, because I think people are more focused on the breakthrough aspects and those, which are absolutely part of it. But how does conformity, by introducing a broader span of diversity, create complexity? You can't do a synthesis unless you have many participants, I guess is part of what I'm saying. And that's the part where the strengths can be powerful.
Okay, Terry, it sounds like me like you're obsessed on some kind of perfection. So that the idea, and also this idea of approximation is also getting obsessed on the idea of perfection. So the idea that perfection is a good one because it's something that we should try to resolve towards, just like the idea that society is progressive and so forth. But it doesn't solve the problem of language, the fact that language constricts. I think even Richard said something about language constricting our discussion of time to a certain extent. So everybody sort of like understands a little bit about that. Somebody in the chat mentioned Heidegger. Heidegger is the philosopher that leads to a lot of this understanding of time and this understanding of time and language. But it has been discussed, at least by Heidegger, and it has been illuminated quite a lot by the writings of Derrida, where he focused much more on ideas of knowledge and language than other philosophers have. So if you don't want to hear the answers, that's fine. But I'm just saying, you asked for who was thinking about this, who has written about it. I gave you the answer. These are people who you could look for, not for necessarily the right answers, but someone who spent time on the problem.
Oh, no, I didn't mean that. In fact, I was very interested in what you said on mentioning the person with that. And when you said I was looking for perfection, maybe you were referring to the philosopher. That I didn't mean.
No, I mean, you don't want to hear any names. You say, I want to know who did this, and then then there's a problem with. Then the problem still exists. You're not talking about the solution to the exact problem I'm talking about, which is 100% absolute reduction of the contradictions in understanding this restrictions of language and upon our thought. And the fact is that there's a lot of people that are involved. There's even some linguists that are involved in that. So it's part of what, all this big bowl of soup called postmodernism. It's the current philosophical thinking, the bowl of soup. Yeah.
James, the reason I was reacting a little bit on that was not the reference. And I appreciate the reference. Please don't get me wrong that, because I love looking at something like that. And when it comes up, it's the part where I missed it and reacted a little bit like that is I didn't see the part about the constructivism where language enables. And I find that perplexing, because the more powerful your language is, the more you can build. And you want to break through the language as part of that building that complexity. So that was the aspect that this philosopher addresses that aspect of it about how
he might disagree. I'm not sure if he would agree with your premise. So I'm not
and
saying
this is-
don't
this
read
is a
them. I'm just
this is a
saying that
premise. Yeah,
he's
this
someone
is
with a
premise
large
I-
vocabulary that might not agree with your premise. I don't know.
Yeah, the premise is one I absolutely cannot back off from because of my computer science background. I know this in such, I could give you so many examples of where the decision for people to join together and say, we shall restrict ourselves on this small point.
Yeah.
Suddenly enabled other points that could not have been discussed before, that could not have been exchanged before. They broadened the audience. So it's the audience broadening aspect. So, but I'll take a look. And by the way,
you're saying the bigger the database, the more power you have. That's I mean, that's positive.
The more chances for synthesis. If I sit here in a small room and I look at four walls all day and I refuse to look at what other people have to say from their perspective.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to grow much.
You get multiple syntheses, but you don't necessarily. My point of view is that you just won't necessarily get absolute synthesis. So if you're looking for absolute synthesis, maybe that's kind of like impossible to get there.
Well, and I would say the exact opposite of what I'm saying. If anything, I thought was just the opposite of that. I'm saying that you never have an absolute synthesis. That's nonsense. That's why I'm so puzzled that you say that, because I'm saying, no, you build things. You don't know where it's going to go. It's hoping for something perfect is nonsensical and a non-starter. Instead, you build up things and you find that, well, if I do certain things, the strategy for getting there is different. So I certainly don't mean that. I don't think there's some kind of absolute perfection on any set of communications or protocols. I think we have no idea what we're going to see at all. So.
And I absolutely wanted to respond to this discussion about this absolute synthesis and the point that you, Terry, made. And also, Ron, when you said that everything is approximate, and it sounded like it's not satisfactory to you. But I think that we have to accept that, yes, everything is approximate. But it can be approximate to various degree, and the difference in degree, it matters, and it can matter a lot.
Oh, yes.
But in principle, we always want at some point to make a decision, right? We are longing for certainty because we needed to survive, we needed to make decisions. And we somehow synthesize all this approximate information, whatever it is, and make this well-defined decision, which is similar to this collapse of wave function in quantum mechanics. So the system was in a mixed state, and then suddenly it became in one well-defined state as a result of our decision. But this again is only temporary and short-lived, because it contributes, it creates a new future, it contributes in a new complexity and a new uncertainty. But there is something that can somehow resolve this paradox, this contradiction between this, that we are creating solutions to reduce or address this uncertainty that contribute to even larger uncertainty. And this solution is the notion of self-organization. So that's what we see, that at least some systems, they are capable to interact with other systems and to create jointly the systems, the stable systems, at least relatively stable, of the higher order, the larger system. And this is what led to humans, this is what led to human societies. And we don't really know whether there are any limits for this process of self-organization. But what is important for us is to ensure the stability of at least our human societies, at least on this planetary scale that we have. And this brings us to this notion of the language, that the language that we are using for communication, it's also approximate. It's always approximate. But we needed just to be good enough in order to understand each other, at least at some level, which is sufficient for this self-organization, for creating and supporting the stabilities of human society. And in this sense, you mentioned that the roads that are taken. So I would say that most roads are not taken yet. So the future is still open. And we don't know how all the current contradictions will be resolved. So we have to accept and embrace this uncertainty and learn to live with this. But we are trying to resolve it every time, literally every day in some ways. And that's all that we can do. So.
You're absolutely right. And Trevor's been waiting for so long. Sorry, Trevor. It's your 15 minutes of glory.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. You're doing well. Yes.
Okay. I wanted to address something Terry was talking about, this idea of getting people together, communicating in order to, manifest or invoke the manifestation of some synthesis and some greater outcome than we regularly experience. And I was thinking a way to do this that I don't see why it wouldn't work is if you look at social media, like if you look at Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, essentially these are kind of networks that to some degree connect human minds together. Except if you look at the platforms, they're extremely simple. Like there's almost nothing to them. And there's also a culture on them, which is kind of a culture of like delusion, stupidity. There is incorrectness is enforced. If you try to be correct, a phenomenon manifests whereby the members of the community will attack you for being correct. They'll say things like, there's all sorts of different ways this is done. They will say things like that as pedantic, or you're overthinking it, or there are things like they will say, if you criticize one political party, they will say, that's both sides. You are saying that they are equivalent. That did not occur in physical reality, the assertion that they're equivalent. What actually occurred was this, pointing out validly that there's imperfection on both sides, but it's the way people perceive it. And then when one person says that, this perception of reality kind of bleeds into other people's minds. And this is how the world becomes very confused. So I was thinking that if you had like a social media platform that's more like a game, and it's like the opposite of the existing ones, where instead of simplicity, you have infinite complexity, and you have extremely strict rules that are actually enforced, such that the goal being having the option of human beings collectively thinking about an idea. And if you impose the rule that each statement a person makes must have 0 errors in it, what might manifest from this is the question.
If I can make one quick comment, some of the earlier social media platforms, the one that comes into mind in particular is Physics ResearchGate, Physics Stack Exchange. I'm sorry, not ResearchGate. That is another one that's actually pretty good. Physics Stack Exchange had a protocol in which people vote up each other's content. And the way they did it, the details matter. Oh, do the details matter? A slight change in your incentive structure can produce the phenomenal disaster of Facebook and Twitter, in which you essentially destroy the fabric of entire nations by your choices, because you wanted to maximize the number of hits you got. But Physics Stack Exchange did have votive system, and actually tended to produce pretty good outcomes. People would look at it. And I remember the first time I ever made a comment on YouTube, I kind of went, what is this bizarre zoo? Because it was kind of like, oh, so people get 1,000 upvotes for saying, woohoo. And if you actually make a comment that's relevant and to the point, you get either totally ignored or something like what you're saying. So I was just astonished at the difference that the rules make on how you do it. And yet, at the same time, and even from the limited examples, I think there are ones where laws make a difference. Laws are a form of programming, where laws is how we program human society. People think free market is a free-for-all. No, that's what you call gangsterism. A free market is where if somebody makes a deal, there's somebody there to guarantee that the deal gets enforced and that they don't lose their money. And that's enabled by a complex structure of laws that has to be very carefully thought out in order to make a free market work. And people miss that point. They say, they just want it to degenerate in gangsterism and call that free market. No, it isn't. That has nothing to do with a free market. Free market's a delicate thing that you have to build. And same for the internet. Right now, we're in a chaotic and dangerous free-for-all in terms of lack of protocols, lack of structure on this. But I've also seen good examples where I still remember the first time a venture capitalist, very smart man, Don Rainier, he hauled some of us into a room, asked us to come in the DOD and said, I got to tell you about this stuff. I think it's important. Something called social media. And we're all kind of going, I don't know. What I mean, looking back on it, I just think I'm just incredibly how naive we were about underestimating the impact of social media. And Don saw it before any of us did. I mean, this is what makes a good venture capitalist, by the way. They see things better in the future than most of us can. And he nailed it. I mean, he realizes you guys ought to be paying attention to this. And we did kind of, but I wish we had paid more attention to it. And I'm just drifting off into reminiscing at this point that these different protocols, you can't tell how the future is going to go in some of this stuff. But I am very convinced there are better ways to do it. Just like in the history of civilizations, civilizations that truly produce innovative outcomes that generally cause better results. And I think we can say there legitimately have been civilizations that are much better at that. They're not easy. They're not simple things. Trevor, I'm sorry.
What's interesting about Stack Exchange is it has a meta perspective. There's like stackoverflow.com. There's also meta.stackoverflow.com. And that's where the community discusses
how to
the
do
platform.
It.
Right. So it forces self-awareness into the system.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it is good. They do a good job of that. They think about their thinking. They don't just casually throw it out there and say, well, I guess it'll work fine. Whereas in the other cases, some of the larger ones, they're just the brutality of the maximize the number of clicks as a metric for human civilization. Probably is not going to bring out our better angels in that, nor has it. So you have to think these things through a bit. By the way, Ron, I'm a little bit. I didn't mean to. I think I offended James, but I'm still a little puzzled on what I
don't think you did.
Okay, because
if anybody did, I did.
How do you spell the name of the philosopher you said? Because I didn't.
Derrida, Derrida. Jacques Derrida.
Okay, that is the one I was thinking of. I just wasn't quite.
Don't even try. Trust me, do not try. I didn't want to say this to James, but Derrida, who's now dead, would object if somebody said that he illuminated something. That was not his point. His point was to do the exact opposite. So But if you think that I'm your friend, trust me, don't try. But if you do, don't blame me. Remember, I warned you. I warned you.
The warning is much appreciated in that.
No, really,
I'm
serious.
still puzzled. I'm genuinely puzzled why James thought I was heading towards perfectionism, because in my mind, it's so the opposite. It's just like,
but this,
no, we have no idea what's going to happen. I'm just none. You know, I'm thinking the other way around. Like,
this is such a good example of what we talked about, approximation in language. You said something, and he might have heard something different. And this is what happens.
Yeah.
And the way we get along is by being approximate. And we do get along because we are approximate. As soon as we get down to nitty-gritty, there are arguments. I mean, if countries get together and try to make some sort of have an agreement, I mean, it generally doesn't work after a while, because people begin to see what's wrong. Whereas it's all okay when you write it out. It all looks brilliant until somebody says, "What do you mean by that word?" And then the whole thing blows up, sometimes literally. And we see that all the time, and we always will. We have to keep being approximate. Not don't look for perfection. You won't find it.
Ron, a quick question for you. The recording of this meeting, will it be available?
Yes.
And also the chat?
If you want to go through this again, yes. Yes.
No, I also want to see the chat that I did not have time to read.
I've got the chat as well, but yes, I will. Yes, I will send you anybody who wants to have this, the whole thing, the whole nearly 3 hours is very, very welcome, and good luck. I watch it to see what I did wrong, etc., and who I offended and why. I always offend somebody. I mean, first of all, that's my purpose in life anyway. So anyway, it was. I'm going to stop now. For some of us, it's late at night. For some of it, in the morning. I enjoyed it very much. Thought it was very, very interesting. Thank you very, very much for all your. And I hope to see you next first Sunday of the month, which will already be February. In the meantime, I wish you a very, very happy new year, and that should be good for all of us, and that we should think and argue, etc. So thank you very, very much, everybody. I want to end with Mark Twain. 1 minute before you wave. I just got this here. Mark Twain said, "What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so." I'll leave you with that.
Mark Twain was a Missourian. I like Mark Twain. He's from my part of the country.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.